Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual event today, A Carbon Neutral Future, the Electrification Ecosystem's Impact on Business and Technology. I'm Carolyn Jones. I am the market president and publisher of the Boston Business Journal, and we're thrilled that you could all join us today for what I know will be a very timely, important, and compelling conversation. You know, as the world looks to go green, and with sustainability being a key central issue for business and technology leaders, what will the future of electrification look like? What developments in electrification infrastructure, electric vehicles, and battery second life need to take shape to ensure a truly sustainable circular economy? What barriers still exist that can derail electric vehicle adoption? Today, we will hear from an incredible panel of experts who will share insights and answers to these and many other critical questions. They include our moderator, Roger Atkins, who runs the consultancy Electric Vehicles Outlook. Roger is a LinkedIn top voice of the electric vehicle industry and has been sharing a long-standing narrative on vehicle electrification for many years, attracting almost 300,000 followers along the way. Roger's knowledge and opinion is sought out by business and media alike. He has more than 30 years of automotive experience and most recently has run the independent consultancy Electric Vehicles Outlook Limited. Joining Roger on our panel today is Gina Aquilano, the Technology Director, Automotive Business Unit for Analog Devices, Guy Ethier, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Global Battery Alliance, and Jake Navarro, Director of Clean Transportation at National Grid. Welcome, and we're thrilled to have all of you join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we look forward to a really great conversation. So Roger, now I will hand things over to you to get the discussion started, and everyone enjoy, and thanks again.
So thank you very much, Carolyn. That's a great welcome, a great introduction, and welcome to you wherever you are in the world. So it could be good morning, it could be good afternoon, could be good evening, of course. We are here at a pivotal moment in time. You can see amazing things happening. We're going to dig into some key questions with our fantastic panel, like Carolyn said. These are people who know their stuff. So we're going to put them to the test on that. And for me, one of the most significant moments happened only yesterday. For the most quintessentially American load-lugging vehicle, the Ford F-150, to go fully electric really means something's happening. And to see, you know, their top sales guy, the president of the United States, behind the wheel, giving it some welly, as we'd call it here in England, that was pretty amazing. So we've got, as Carolyn said, speakers from Boston. Guy is in Belgium. I'm here in the UK. And I'm going to, if I may, panel, start off with this sort of general question. I'll nominate who I'd like to ask. The past few years, we've seen, you know, quite a dramatic increase in electric vehicle adoption in some countries more than others, for sure. I think it was 2.3 million vehicles were sold in 2020, which is a many-fold increase on just a few years before that. So it's a cumulative process, there's no doubt. So the kind of, you know, that's one thing, the vehicles. Then there's the charging infrastructure. We're going to get into a lot of that, the battery, of course. So the first question I'd like to put to the panel is, despite this wonderful ambition and this momentum we're seeing, what barriers still exist that might derail this EV process, this whole kind of momentum that we've got now, and how might we overcome them? So Jake, I'm going to come to you first, because an electric vehicle without being powered up from somewhere or another isn't going to go very far. So are we ready, and what barriers do you see right now that may be in the process of being overcome? What would you say to that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Roger. And, you know, just for folks who don't know, you know, National Grid is an electric and natural gas utility that serves 3 states in the northeastern U.S., New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And, you know, we take electrification of transportation really seriously, and we talk to our customers about it a lot and ask them, you know, what are the barriers that they are seeing. The 2 biggest ones that tend to bubble up, Roger, are the cost of the vehicles. I think we're seeing a lot of progress on that. You know, the last estimate I saw was between 20 and 30 new vehicle models would be launching in the US this year. Many of them, you know, more affordable. And I think we'll see those costs continue to come down over time. But the second one is range anxiety. You know, people are still really nervous about where they're going to fuel their vehicles. Now, we believe most of the charging for electric vehicles is still going to happen at people's homes, but range anxiety is real, and it's a real barrier for folks. And that's why our company and many other companies in this ecosystem are really focused on building electric vehicle charging infrastructure to help bring that barrier down.
Sure. Okay, good. So Guy, you're in Belgium and you know a lot about batteries. That's because you're chairman of the board of directors of the Global Battery Alliance, which is a lot of countries, a lot of significant players and people that come together to make this. So are we there yet? You know, what are the barriers for the battery, would you say, Guy?
Well, Roger, thanks a lot, and thanks for the organizer. Indeed, this is a very timely event. Well, listen, I one of the real challenges that I think is out there is the credibility of the electric vehicle being a real solution for climate. After all, I mean, this is the reason we're doing this. This is the reason we're doing this transformation. And so we need to have very transparent information made available to everybody, to undoubtedly making sure that, you know, they're making the right choice and we're all making the right decision in sort of migrating from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle. Now, everything else has to follow. I mean, Jake's system has to be there, the infrastructure has to be there, the connectivity has to be there, the distance to be driven has to be sufficient to give people the assurance that they can get where they want to be. And if they need to recharge along the way, you know, it's fast and quick and available. But, you know, at the end of the day, though, I mean, the real credibility item is about, is it a better solution for the planet? And you know, that's where, you know, the collectivity of the partnership of the Global Battery Alliance is focusing its mind on. It's focusing its mind on greenhouse gases emission, and it's focusing its mind on the other determinant is the supply of material. One of the things that is, you know, Mother Nature put different resources in many places in the world. We got to make sure that they are extracted in the right way, they get into the vehicle in the right way, and at the end of the day, it is recycled or reused in a proper fashion, so that, you know, we're maximizing the resources we have.
Yeah, you're quite right. We can't make this monumental switch if it's not doing all the right things. So Gina, I'd like to come to you on this then. So Gina Aquilano, you're technology director for the automotive section of unit for analog devices. You will have seen a lot of what's going on behind the scenes, the technology behind this shift. Some of the challenges. We've seen a real challenge at the moment in supply chain with chips, and it's, you know, shut down plants. It's really given us some big problems. What are the barriers do you see then in keeping this momentum going from the technology standpoint, from what you see at Analog Devices?
Yeah, so I'd say there's multiple themes in my view. You know, the first one is improving cost, right? And I think as Jake pointed out, the costs are coming down. We're getting really close to parity with internal combustion engines, which is great progress. I think one threat to that potential cost improvement is the supply chain for raw materials and adjustments that need to be made today in mining in order to ensure the supply for EVs. Assuming that goes well, I think the next few barriers are around improving quality. I think EVs are new, and for people to build trust and comfort in that technology, both on the range piece, but also on the safety and quality piece. You know, we see news lines on EV fires and burning down houses in their garage, right? And I think that gives hesitation to consumers. And I think as the industry really tries to scale, there needs to probably be more traceability, trust, transparency in terms of the battery health. So I think that's an area where, you know, in my seat at Analog Devices, I can see us help ecosystem innovate and help improve quality and that transparency. I also think there's one other dimension that's kind of interesting. It's a bit longer, a longer view, and it has to do with the residual value of the battery, and it ties into that transparency piece of battery health. The used EV market, how is that going to shape up, right? Is that really going to be attractive compared to, you know, the used car market we're used to today? And I think there's this trust tax that comes into place when you sell a used EV if you don't have enough knowledge on kind of that battery health. So I'd say those are going to become, I think, more in the forefront as EVs scale and take off.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. Well, all three of you, that's good food for thought. And I think we'll come on to the battery in a bit more detail in a moment, actually, Gina. But given that we all want to create a better version of what we've got today, as Guy has mentioned, and certainly where we want to have more affordable electric vehicles and more people with access to EVs, not just for the wealthy. You know, a lot of EVs to date have been cars that are aspirational and all of that stuff. And equally, we have to bring together, you know, a collaboration of things. We have to find where there's the middle ground between competition and collaboration. And we have to build some of these significant partnerships that perhaps we haven't seen before, certainly in terms of provision of energy and, you know, feeding that into the mobility world. So the next question I'd like to ask really is about how do you see the evolution of that ecosystem sort of coming together? How are we going to get collaboration between different players? I mean, Guy, if I can ask you, you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience from being in the business that you are and seeing best practice, so to speak, from around the world. What do we need to see in the United States, but what do we need to see everywhere to make these kind of collaborations come together between energy, getting the cost down of EVs, putting the infrastructure in place? What do you see that needs to happen?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and I'd like to answer to it with a story, if you don't mind, Roger. And it is the story of Guy Ethier as an executive in the cathode material. And in 2006, I developed a strategy in that cathode business to distinguish our company from others on our behavior, on our sourcing, sustainable sourcing, on our manufacturing capabilities, on the greenhouse gas through our supply chain, all of those elements that today are in question, at least from the cathode manufacturing distribution point of view and the battery. And I discovered, out of a lot of effort, that I was hitting on the wrong button. Because those elements, you know, if they were not done in a collective fashion, in true partnership, in a pre-competitive mode, you cannot win market out of this. So there are some elements that are part of that battery in e-mobility that needs to be done in a collective fashion with partners that are never talked to each other before. You know, the extractive industry never talked to the transformation industry, who never talked to the cathode manufacturing industry, who never talked to the battery manufacturer industry, who never talked to the OEMs. So, I mean, you need to develop this partnership. And, you know, how do you engage civil society into those elements? So I think those are, you know, elements that needs to be fixed, that needs to be established, you know, and Gina talked about credibility. This is one of the elements that is across the board, that doesn't have any color, faces, you know, it needs to be addressed by everybody and will be resolved as a collective fashion. There are other elements, obviously, that, you know, you need to compete on, you know, manufacturing efficiency, your access to market, you know, the models, energy access, energy transportation, charging stations, effectiveness. I mean, there's a lot of elements that where, if you know, efficiency and competitiveness can come about. But there are some elements in this new business that really need a true partnership through the entire value chain, including civil society, in order to find the right solution so that you and I, as the public, have the full trust that there are some elements we don't need to worry about because they're taken care of and they're rightly taken care of.
Sure, sure. Well, no, that's a significant and interesting story about the cathode, and I'm sure most of the audience watching excuse me, are technical people, so they know there's an anode, a cathode, a separator. I always think of the battery in my kind of simplistic way as basically a sandwich. It's got those kind of three core elements, obviously a bit more, but essentially that's the stuff of how it's going to come together. And we're going to come onto that in a bit more detail, as I mentioned. Gina, what new friends have you got then, or started to get, in this new world of electrification? You know, partnerships and people you and your business are working with that you haven't before. Can you give us a bit of an insight into that? Who might be some of the new kids on the block for your business?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting journey, right? And I think we can all agree that no one can really do this alone if we want to really accelerate electrification and enable a true circular economy. And I think what we're seeing is impact of regulation is really requiring faster innovation. And to those lengths, we are partnering more closely with the car OEMs on developing technology and in a joint way with a shared vision on the goals we're trying to achieve. So it's been super exciting because once you share that knowledge, I think from the semiconductor level up to the end application with that system information exchange, it really can not only accelerate innovation, but produce much better products that hit those end goals of, you know, sustainability, of safely enabling faster charging, of, you know, longer range, longer battery life. All of these things we're jointly working towards. And what we even see is the car OEMs who are working with the battery manufacturers, but there's a lot more of these micro ecosystems forming, right? I mean, I think we see, you know, GM and LG launching a battery plant. You see Tesla with a lot of vertical integration, and it's all about, I think, securing supply, but also thinking about the entire battery life cycle from battery production, actually starting at mining to battery production through to recycling or reuse programs. Like, what's going to happen to all of these batteries after they're done in the car? So, you know, I think there's a lot of joint programs being looked at in terms of energy storage and car OEMs to figure out, you know, is there a good reuse program here?
Yes.
So I think it's going to be super interesting as this continues to accelerate.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's getting interesting in so many aspects. Jake, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but just building on what you've said there, Gina, I can remember seeing at a trade event your wireless BMS system. And I was particularly intrigued with that because, you know, I didn't know you could have a wireless BMS system. And, you know, it seemed to be quite a kind of leap forward in terms of saving space, saving weight, you know, and doing a lot of things, as you say, much more efficiently. So when it comes to partnerships, you now work with GM. I saw on their CES day, their keynote, when they were talking about some of their development, I'm sure they talked about this as well. So, you know, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, what that wireless BMS can do for people? Because clearly you've convinced GM because they're using it in theirs. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? I know the gist of it, but can you give us a little quick sheep dip into what it is?
So I think the idea is really enabling modularity, right? So I guess a wired BMS system, just for everyone's knowledge, you have stacks of batteries that are wired together, and you communicate with these different modules in a control loop. As you can imagine, when you design these packs that go in electric vehicles, it can be a lot of wiring, and you need to physically get in there and make connections. You have to custom design the harness for every vehicle type that you're supporting. And then it ends up being a very manual assembly process. You can't quite use robotic insertions when you're connecting the wire, and disassembly becomes more challenging. So the idea of the wireless system is just get rid of that wire harness. And now you have a wireless module that you can, and if you saw the GM press release, it enables them to scale very quickly from EV Hummer to a much smaller, something like a Bolt with the same module design. And what's even more interesting is with this wireless technology, as soon as you attach it to the module, you can now start collecting data. So now you have mass amounts of data available to you when you're not in the car. So you can use that in pre-production and build up, models and look for anomaly detection to avoid recalls in the future. You can use it in second life, or when you're trying to assess, is this battery good enough for a second life application, or does it go straight to recycling? So I think that data availability, that data transparency is a big piece of this. So we're really just trying to streamline things, make it easier, get rid of some of the hurdles that our customers face when they're trying to scale.
Sure. Okay, look, please don't take this as a buying signal, because I'm not in the market to buy a wireless BMS, but it sounds so good. But is it a lot more money? Is this a lot more expensive than the traditional route?
When you look at the total cost of ownership, you actually get massive improvements, but it does take a change of mindset to integrate this. There are a lot of kind of knock-on changes, but if you buy into that value proposition, it's a slam dunk.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Sorry, I sort of went on a bit of an excursion, because Jake, I would love to know then, given, you're the director of Clean Transportation Solutions and National Grid. So you're used to connecting things up and finding partnerships and bringing things together. What are you discovering in that, in terms of new people or new industries that you're accessing and having to get involved in? What's your experience?
Yeah, I have to say I couldn't agree more with Guy and with Gina about the sort of non-traditional kinds of partnerships that this evolution is requiring. And I would add electric utilities to that list that you were mentioning, right? I think a lot of organizations haven't totally thought about their electric utility in the way they're going to have to if they're serious about electrifying transport. And a good example here is companies or organizations that operate vehicle fleets, right? An electric utility, maybe we have a service to light up your depot or something like that, but traditionally there's not a strong relationship from a fleet manager to the electric utility. And that changes completely fundamentally if you now have electric vehicles, where your electric utility partnership is one of the most important partnerships you have. And building that infrastructure to supply your vehicles is super important. When we're starting to talk to fleet operators, one of the things that they tell us is, they're interested in electrification, especially because of some of the total cost of ownership improvements, like what Gina mentioned. But they kind of don't know where to get started. They sort of have how to run a diesel fleet down, but there's so much to learn. And one of the things we've been doing are these fleet advisory studies with folks who have a vehicle fleet and are interested in electric transportation but don't know where to get started. And that's really helped kind of say, okay, here are the vehicles that you could electrify right away. Here are the ones that you might want to wait because of what's on the market. Here's what the total cost of ownership looks like for fueling your vehicles this way versus that way, and that really helps. The electric charging infrastructure industry alone, and that's separate from the battery manufacturing and the vehicle manufacturing, but that industry alone has so many different players in it, from the vehicle OEMs, and they're making their own charging equipment in some cases, to the charging station companies and operators, network companies, charging station installers, cities and towns, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And a lot of those organizations are not ones that have worked together before. What I'm seeing so far is that there is really strong collaboration across those industries, because I think people and organizations are really, really interested in this transition, partially because of sustainability and environmental benefits, but also because of the huge business opportunity that they see in this space. And that's creating, an accelerant for the kind of collaboration you're talking about.
Yeah. Jake, I'm so glad you just put that last bit in there, the commercial opportunity, because I do think that for a lot of people, the narrative has been a bit perhaps too clean and squeaky. And it's a bit like, well, yeah, we all want to save the world, but if I do it and the guy next door doesn't, and it's to our commercial detriment, what happens next? So I think you're right. I'm glad you brought that up. I think there is a massive commercial opportunity here. So no wonder people are joining up if they're all making some money from this transition. It's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? Listen, a few of you have mentioned circular economics, and you've certainly mentioned TCO. So the final question before we come into a few individual points and get to some questions from the audience. The battery, what about second life of the battery? It's clearly a critical component of the electric vehicle. It's often the most expensive part of the bill of materials. So how are we going to develop this concept? Because it seems like that at the moment of second life batteries. Guy, you probably know and see more about this than many people on the planet, quite frankly, given your role. Is this really going to happen? Are we going to see tens of hundreds of thousands of second life batteries doing something, Guy? And what are they going to be doing?
Well, I honestly, I think absolutely we will see them. There's so much value into the battery. Right now, what is it? I'm looking at my colleagues here, but it's probably a third of the price of the vehicle today that is the battery. There is a huge amount of natural resources that are there. The nice thing about them is that they're infinitely recyclable. So you can, that's fantastic. So nothing is get consumed there. And today, everything you read about is that at the end of the vehicle, say 10, 15 years of driving, there's probably 80% value into the battery at the end of it. So there's certainly an opportunity for a second life to start with in application like grids and renewable energy and others. There is, and then there is the material itself. I mean, again, I'll give you my own example. When I was at Umicore, we were one of the first of having a battery recycling, full battery recycling capability in Belgium here, where we were able to take batteries from all around the world. Mind you, at that time, they were relatively small. They came from the electronics because, battery from cars were not very frequent. But, that technology exists. There are some challenges in the type of technology to be used. But definitely, I mean, there is a huge amount of resources that is there. And, and there's enough value for people to get a business. You're saying, is there a reason for me to get a business? Here's a good reason for you to get a business. Get into the recycling business, and again, you need to have partnership though. And those partnership, again, are probably different than the color of the one you've seen before. So, it's time right now to establish those partnerships, to understand who's responsible for the end of life of vehicle. That's going to be another question. And how do you organize all those mechanism? How do you allow material to go through boundaries, through borders? Today there are some difficulties sometimes in moving batteries, end-of-life battery across the world. One, Gina said it about, safety. The second thing is the pure fact that people call them waste. And if they're called waste, they cannot be moved around so easily. So, I mean, you need to start not talking about waste anymore. You need to talk about resources that needs to be brought back to bear into their original purpose of battery. So those are the challenges, but it's a huge opportunity and it's a must. People have to get to that. But the volume has to come through as well. I mean, you need to have end-of-life vehicle in mass to offer the amount of battery that is necessary for the second life or the recycling.
Yes. Okay, good. Now, I'm thinking of a turn of phrase I've heard, which is that the Chinese actually call electric vehicles new energy vehicles. So I'm pretty confident to think that that's about the nexus of renewable energy and storage and new mobility or electric vehicles, with the kind of battery as the meat in the sandwich. I know that's the second time I've mentioned sandwiches, but I skipped lunch. So that's probably why I've done. Jake, how much of a hope have you got that all these electric vehicles over time are going to give us second life batteries for renewable energy storage to build this whole ecosystem? Do you really think that's going to happen? Because as Guy says, it sounds great in principle, but how do you get these damn great batteries out of a vehicle economically and all of that stuff? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I certainly won't pretend to have the battery expertise that Guy or Gina have. But I guess what I would say is energy storage for electric grid applications is only going to increase in importance as we have more and more intermittent renewables on the grid. And there's more dynamic things happening on the grid, right? There's rooftop solar, there's electric vehicles that at some point we get to the V2G level, vehicle to grid applications where vehicles can discharge themselves directly back onto the grid and customers can be rewarded for that. And so I think, the electric grid is evolving in ways we've just never seen before, and it's becoming so much more dynamic, and energy storage is going to be play a huge role in that. Whether that energy storage comes from second life of former EV batteries or other sources of energy storage, I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that, but certainly that's going to be a tremendous need. And so if the technology and the economics make sense for the EV batteries to be a huge source of that energy storage, I think it'll absolutely happen.
Great. That's good to hear. Now, listen, Gina, we talked about GM a moment ago, and I think for the fairness of balance, there's another great powerhouse, automotive powerhouse in America, of course, Ford. And funnily enough, what Jake just said there, this V2G, did you see the Ford F-150 commercial that they ran when they did the launch yesterday for the Lightning? It was about, you can build your home with your Ford F-150. You can plug it in. You can put your power tools onto it. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I was quite surprised, very pleasantly, about that. So how do you think the realistic aspect of this journey is going to be? The second life battery thing, the vehicle to grid thing, whatever. It all sounds good, but can people, like Analog, help people build that and put it together?
Yeah, I think the vehicle to grid piece is very interesting. And I think what's aiding with not only the vision of vehicle to grid, but also for second life is how the battery longevity is increasing, right? We've heard Elon Musk talk about the 1,000,000-mile battery, and we're nearly there, and we're pushing beyond. And that just enables more life, more value in that battery. And how do we choose to use it? I think if vehicle to grid takes off, it is going to wear the battery out sooner, but the battery has a lot of life. And the question is how much life is left? The battery is likely going to outlive the car. And do you recycle or do you reuse? And I think that there's people in both camps. The question of commercial viability of a reuse program is being investigated. I think that it's a no-brainer in terms of carbon impact, right? It's better to reuse first and then recycle. You'll have a lower carbon footprint, but can we make the economics work? And I think it's all about streamlining that process of going from the car into a second life application and making it simple and easy and modular and reusable, right? So I think that's where, in my position, I'm very passionate about sustainability and electrification, and that's a real big focus area for us is how do we alleviate those pain points and make our contribution.
Yeah, and I mean, as Guy said early on, right at the beginning, engineering into all of this change something that's going to be better. Not just replacing, one thing for another thing. It's got to be an advance. It's got to be progress. And that's really important. So great. Listen, guys, you're really giving me good answers. I'm trying to think of a few more difficult ones because I need to test you out a bit more. But Jake, one thing that I've personally been passionate about for some time is the mass adoption of commercial vehicle fleets, buses and taxis and vans and all of that sort of stuff. So is National Grid doing anything specifically in the arena of commercial vehicle fleets that it looks like they may be going to be adopted quicker? Because it's not all just about cars and having a nice fancy charger at home or whatever. It is about this stuff of ensuring that our buses and trucks and whatever are EV quicker than anything else. Because if one thing's going to improve air quality faster, it's going to be those things shifting. So are you doing anything in and around that arena?
Absolutely. And you hit on something near and dear to my heart as well, Roger. So, I guess you nailed it in terms of, commercial fleets, particularly medium and heavy duty vehicles, are really responsible for a disproportionate amount of both air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And just to put, some statistics on it, I'll get, don't quote me on these numbers, but I think I'll get them at least close. I think in the state of Massachusetts, medium and heavy duty vehicles are about 3% of the vehicles on the road, but they're about 6% of the vehicle miles traveled. And I think they're 20 to 30% of the emissions. Yeah. And so, and with a vehicle fleet, you can, to use a sports analogy, you can score in bunches, right? You're not just replacing one vehicle at a time. You might get part of a turnover cycle and all of a sudden be replacing tens or hundreds of vehicles in a year. So we see that as a huge opportunity. It's also really crucial for equity in the electrification of transportation. I think what we've seen in the past, and somebody had touched on it earlier. Sorry, I can't remember who, but in terms of for a lot of the beginning of this evolution of electrifying transport, it's kind of been, if you can afford a Tesla, you get to be part of this transition.
Yeah. It was me that said it, Jake.
And so Roger, you teed me up perfectly. And so I think equity is so important for us to focus on, particularly as a utility, but I think for everybody who's in this space, this is really important. And commercial fleets or public fleets, particularly public transit or school buses, those are the places where we can give access to folks who might not be able to afford an electric vehicle, or might not want to own a vehicle at all, but we can get them access to clean transportation. And then, commercial fleets that are, whatever it might be, a shipping company or, any sort of vehicle fleet, those emissions do tend to, disproportionately impact low-income communities or, environmental justice communities. And so taking those vehicles off the road or converting them and reducing their emissions by electrifying also has a huge impact for the local communities that they're in. So some of the things that we're doing at National Grid, I mentioned the fleet advisory studies we do. We also help support some of the what we call make-ready infrastructure. So that's the electric infrastructure that interconnects a charging station to the electric grid. And so we'll support some or all of the cost of that infrastructure for a fleet customer who's interested in converting. We've also proposed supporting some of the cost of vehicles for things like school buses to help, get the initial costs closer to, parity with a diesel or another kind of internal combustion vehicle, because, we just see fleets as increasingly possibly the most important segment in electrification of transportation.
Yeah. Well, you're pushing on an open door with me on that. I've believed in that for a long time. It's like a Pareto law. The minority of vehicles produce the majority of the air quality issue. And it is significant. And that business about parity and equity and societal kind of shift, I think you articulate that very, very well. So thank you for that. Listen, we're 3/4 of the way through this. We're doing an hour show. We'd like to be very respectful of people's time. So we're going to finish on time in 15 minutes, and I'm going to get some audience questions in. But before I do that, I want to ask Guy one final question. It could be argued, I suppose, Guy, that it's all about the battery. Of course, it's all about everything, but the battery is so fundamental. And I've got some notes here, and I just want to read from them to get this right. By 2030, batteries could enable 30% of the reductions in carbon emissions in the transport and power sectors, and provide 600 million people with access to electricity, as well as creating 10 million safe and sustainable jobs around the world. Now, to realize that potential, the battery value chain is going to have to expand, the numbers I'm looking at here, 19 times over this decade. So Guy, this is a huge question now for realizing this grand ambition of electrification. Guy, can it be done? How are we going to get this supply chain to all over the world, not just for the Chinese who've had a crack at it early? How do we make it work for everybody?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for reading from the GBA report. So
good. I needed to, Guy. I couldn't remember it.
You get good sources. Congratulations.
Okay.
Are we going to get there? I think it's a real challenge. I mean, I think it's Jake that was talking about capital investment. There's huge amount of money that needs to be invested in resource development to start with. I mean, you need to start at the beginning of that battery value chain, and that's not small peanuts, not small business. I mean, it's a huge capital investment. It's a huge commitment. You need to find those resources. Then you need to have the capacity to make those batteries. I mean, that's also a huge capital investment. There are battery mega plants being developed all around the world right now, and it's going fast, so amazingly. So I think it's a real challenge, and the challenge we talked about in the last round, which is the recycling capacity. That's also a challenge in itself in being able to recover those materials. So yes, I think it can happen, but it needs a lot of cash, a lot of money to be invested in a short period of time. One thing also is extremely important, and we didn't talk about very much, is that we need clean energy.
Yes.
If you get electricity that comes from coal, if your sources of electricity are not clean, your life cycle is not going to make it in comparison to other type of mobility. So that's also a very important aspect, and there's huge amount of money also that is necessary there. I mean, I am a Canadian working in Europe, and I see what's happening in Europe right now in the transformation of energy, and I'm always very concerned. I'll tell you, people are moving out of nuclear in Europe, and the only solution short term they have is coal. So, they're not helping the situation. So, energy supply is also a very important aspect. So when we talk about this whole debate, you need to have the wholesome of the entire issue. So, again, demonstrating that you need, this is the complexity of the partnership that is facing us here. And you need to have all the ducks working in a row so that you get to the result, including you and I buying the cars.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of ducks you've just described there, and that's a long old row. And funnily enough, you've actually answered one of the questions that had come in, Guy. Will the supply of green energy keep up with the demand for EVs? And I think this thing that Jake alluded to there about clean air, and I was nudging him on. Clean air is one thing. The zero tailpipe thing is important, and that's one aspect, but it's like a twin imperative. The other bit is CO2 reduction. So obviously what you don't want is just like the long tailpipe where the pollution is just shifted from the vehicle right the way through to the power station of some description. So I think that's a really key question. In fact, Jake, do you want to add a bit to what Guy's just described there on that? I mean, so the question is, will the supply of green energy keep up with the demand for EVs?
Yeah, so I think maybe two points I'd make on this one. Number one, because I get asked this a lot. at least in the part of the world where we operate in the northeastern U.S., converting from an internal combustion engine vehicle to a electric vehicle on day one offers greenhouse gas emissions reduction today, even with the energy mix that we have right now. And that energy mix is getting steadily greener over time. So I know a lot of people tend to have questions about, line losses when you transmit that electricity over long distances and things like that. But you can be confident that today on day one, you're saving greenhouse gas emissions reductions by converting to an EV. The other thing that I'll mention is the supply and the emissions related to that supply is really important. It's also quite dependent on the demand, and not just the total quantity of that demand, but when that demand happens. And I think EVs are actually a really interesting application of that, because unlike some other kinds of electricity usage, we have the ability to shift the time at which we charge our vehicles a little bit more. And so one of the things we're investing in right now are managed EV charging programs, or demand response programs that incentivize customers to charge their EV at non-peak times, so that you can create savings for everybody who pays for electricity, and also in a sort of a future state scenario, make sure that those EVs are charging when there's plentiful intermittent green energy, solar or wind. That's also a really interesting potential application of that.
Yeah, just in a note here, there's a study from the Fraunhofer Institute that says 4 million EVs in Germany until 11.6 terawatts of additional energy will be needed. I mean, it is the scale of this adoption, as and when it happens, is going to really be quite a challenge for the folks in your industry. Here's another challenge. I'm hoping this is quite a difficult question for you, Gina. Here you go. Excuse me. From the audience. Given that we're seeing adoption of both battery electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles, here's the question that says, do you think there'll ever be a retrofit kit or something similar for PHVs, all of these plug-in hybrid vehicles that are going onto the market, that can take the short range they typically have, 20, 30 miles or something? Often they don't even do that sometimes, and improving those cars over time? It's a sneaky question because it's just come in and you won't have prepped for it, but it is. Do you think that's something that maybe you could conjure up, some kind of retrofit kit?
I'm not sure about retrofit for an existing car that maybe wasn't quite designed for it. But I think what's an interesting concept is looking at battery as a service, right? And looking at potentially buying a car without the battery pack and leasing the battery pack, right? Where you may have swappable modules or swappable pack, right? And buy kind of a subscription, because it helps lower your cost of ownership, and brings in some interesting dynamics, I think, to the ecosystem. And I think in terms of, managing first life applications, second life applications, health of battery fleets, that type of business model could be actually quite disruptive if it takes off. And I know there's some startups working in that space. There's NIO in China that touts, really fast swapping, faster than DC charging. And that can kind of play into, I think, what Jake was talking about. If you have a swappable pack, you might have more control over when you recharge it. It's a super interesting concept. So it's not quite retrofit, but it's an extension to what the future could look like.
Yeah, I got that. Coincidentally, and we didn't arrange this before, in case anyone's wondering, I spoke to Shai Agassi a couple of weeks ago and put it up at a podcast on my website, because he originated Better Place, which is 14 years ago, which was the principle of separating the battery from the vehicle for a bunch of reasons, including, interestingly, having that aggregation into the grid and having that energy management through separate batteries, so to speak. And you're right, NIO, Geely, BAIC, I think there's a startup called Amply, in the US. I think they're in, I think they might be in San Francisco.
Silicon Valley, yep.
Yeah, well, they're bound to be, aren't they? That's where all the fancy dudes hang out. But listen, we're coming up to the close of time. You've really taught me a lot. I really want to thank you on behalf of the audience that you've given us some really good insights. You know, you were handpicked because you know what you're talking about. And can I just say to the three of you, you haven't disappointed. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. I'm going to actually give you a challenge in 60 seconds, and I will cut you off. Can you in 60 seconds give your own wrap up on what you think of, you know, where we are, what happens next? So I'll come to you first, Guy. There you are. Hang on, I've got my watch. Go on then. You've got 60 seconds. Give us a quick sum up, please.
Battery passport. Is that short enough?
Oh man,
I think battery needs a passport so they can demonstrate through their entire value chain, including end of life, all the information we talked about, so that you know how to handle at the end of life, you know where it's coming from, and so on and so forth, and everybody's happy.
That's brilliant, and you did it with a spare 30 seconds. So I'm going to come to you next, Jake, then Gina. So go on, then your 60 seconds start now.
Do I get Guy's extra 30 seconds?
No, you've got your own 60 seconds.
No, I guess what I'd just say is that, you know, it feels to me like we're really just on the precipice of this. I think so much is going to be changing in the next, the coming years, coming decades on this. It's going to be changing really fast. So there's a lot of unknowable things right now, but I'm just so encouraged to see, or people and organizations like Guy's and like Gina's, and like a lot of the people on the call who are super engaged in this. It's just gives you a real sense of optimism that this is happening. And I would also just say for anybody out there who's interested in electrification, get in touch with your electric utility. They probably have a program for you, and you might not have been in touch with them before, so it's worth doing.
Yeah, great. You had about 10 seconds to spare there, but I also, by the way, like the fact earlier you said, let's take everyone with us. Let's make sure this is inclusive. I think that's really important. So, Gina, you actually get the last word. Normally that's me, but it's definitely going to be you. So, you've got your 60 seconds. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that electrification is happening, and you can see all the thought leaders come together. Today's one good example of that on how do we solve the toughest problems? How can we keep pace with what's needed in terms of innovation, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of sustainability. So I think the battery passport is a part of that equation, and I think I'm just continuously excited to work with this ecosystem to make it happen.
Brilliant. So look, Guy, Gina and Jake, like I said, really, really fantastic stuff. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Carolyn for giving us their intro and that support for this. And we look forward to seeing you again on something similar to this. But for now, thank you so much, and goodbye.